Oh my goodness. Happy Thursday and welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Brown Girl Sound Off, BGSO, the podcast. First of all, let's give it up because we are like smack dab in the middle of another month. I cannot believe like where the heck did April go? How are we already in the very middle of April? I mean, this year, I think as you get older, the years just fly by. Nevertheless, if you are just joining us for the very first time, thank you so much for tuning in. It's always a pleasure to have new listeners, new viewers just kind of tune in. Let us know what you think. Please be sure if you're watching on YouTube to like, share, subscribe, and even comment. Share all over your social media pages. If you're watching in the group, we've got like so many new members just this month alone. Let us know what you think about BGSO because this is a podcast where we seek to center and amplify the voices of women of color. So let's get into it. So this month we've been talking all about relationships. Again, I can't say that topic without a smile. It's just beautiful to talk about. And so we started out this month, the very first episode was all about what do women of color need to do before we enter relationships. So we dropped some, don't forget your values. Y'all not want to forget about that one. We dropped some gems, honey. And so anyway, we talked about what that prep work, what that self work looks like. And then the following week, so last week, we started talking about, well, once you're in a relationship, then what are some things we need to do so that we don't lose ourselves and so that we remain intact, right? So that's kind of where we're going. But I am really excited because tonight we have a very, 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 very special guest. We have, who happens to be my cousin, Carrie Holland-Lee. Okay, Carrie, I see you in the house. Hey, Carrie. And so Carrie's actually a therapist. She's doing big boss things. Okay, talk about women of color on the move, honey. I mean, she not only works with a group practice, but she also has her own practice. If you are an entrepreneur, please let us know in the comments right now. Say boss up, baby. And so that's what Carrie is doing. She's bossing up. She has her own practice. She loves working with lots of people, including especially women of color. But I'm going to ask Carrie to just tell us a little bit about your work really quickly before we get into this topic, and also what inspired you to become a therapist.
Well, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I feel so special. So what made me get into counseling? I've always just had a passion for helping people. And I recognized that I ended up counseling a lot of my friends anyway, so I might as well hop right on in as a professional.
Look, and your family, honey.
Yes. So I've always found it interesting why people do what they do. And so it helps me to be able to dive into that a little bit more, as well as to be able to help people, especially people that look like us. So both men and women, have a hard time anyway getting into therapy. And so it just makes them more comfortable to see somebody that looks like them. So, and I got my license in, what was it, 2010. So it's been almost 11 years now. Yeah, that makes me feel old. So, yeah, and I've been doing various, demographics of people, whether it is substance abuse, young teenagers, or all the way up to the older population. So I really love it.
Yay, yay. And so your private practice is called Healing Waters Counseling. What a beautiful name. And I know that, a lot of times people, there's a stigma around seeking counseling or therapy, but I love that name, like Healing Waters, because we all need healing, right? From lots of things, whether it's generational traumas, relationship traumas, all types of stuff. And so healing is good, and healing makes us feel whole. So thank you so much for sharing that, and thanks again for being here. So I know that we've been talking, I know you've been tuning in, we've been talking about relationships, for the past 2 episodes in this month. And so I just want you to tell everyone, like, what is it that you typically see? I mean, I know it's difficult to generalize, and you also share that you see a wide range of demographics and folks seek you for various reasons. But when we're thinking about women of color, are there any patterns that that you've noticed in your practice over the years?
Well, one thing I can say is above everything else is that there is a lack of women of color who are in my profession. And so there's almost like a desperation to have somebody who, if nothing else, like I said, is reflective and looks like them. But a lot of the specific kinds of people that I tend to get is there is a lot of generational trauma. And that is reflective in relationships as well. A lot of times when we think about couples therapy or relationship counseling in any way, we think about current issues. But a lot of it goes back to how we are socialized, how we are raised, and the ideals that we are raised with, and how that impacts our relationships. And so there are a lot of family dynamic issues, a lot of communication issues, and just a general kind of breakdown into what makes a healthy or successful relationship.
And you know what? I have like a follow up to that question, because some months ago, some of us on this call, we, hosted an event called The Double Edged Sword of the Strong Black Woman Stereotype. And so, I'm someone who's actually currently in counseling, right? And I go as part of my my self-care regimen. I look forward to going, just like I look forward to working out or meditating or doing something else nice for myself, because it is something that I'm doing that's nice for myself. But what I'm wondering is, in terms of patterns, when we speak with women, and even when we're hosting, our podcast, or even doing our live recaps, women are typing in, and there's some common threads that I'm seeing. It's like women of color are waiting to like let these weights off of our shoulders and lay these
Mhm.
burdens down, and are trying to push back against this myth that all we are strong. And it's like, yeah, I am strong, and I'm also
Mhm.
vulnerable. I'm also a whole lot of things. And so what I want to know is, in what ways do you see that kind of showing up in your practice? You know what I mean? Do you tend to see, like, especially when it comes to women of color, do you tend to see them coming in and it feeling like an actual physical lift, being lifted, and especially when they're coming to seek therapy? Um, and maybe it's because you spoke about communication. Maybe it's because if they communicate too assertively, they're deemed aggressive or whatever. I'm just curious about like how that shows up on your side of things. I know how I've been impacted and experienced that, but as a therapist,
Mhm.
like, how do you experience that?
So I think that it shows up in a multitude of ways, right? So there are some clients who will sit and come in and they will talk the entire hour. And they're just like, wow, that was the first time somebody actually listened to me for an hour
Mm,
straight. And there are some that are so um burdened with this idea that I have to be able to get through this, that it's almost like pulling teeth, to talk about different issues, because they feel ashamed that they're even at the counselor's office. They feel like somehow they failed to be able to handle certain situations. Even when it comes to the most serious of traumas, when you're talking about like sexual abuse or things like that, there's a lot of guilt and shame and secrecy around that. And so, coming to a counselor is, typically it's the first time in their, 40, 50 years old. And this is the first time they've talked about things in their childhood. And so there is a definitely a pattern of I should be able to do this. And because I'm not, then somehow that makes me less than. And it shows up not only in relationships, but, in individual therapies as well.
I can, wow, I wrote down the three words, like you rattled them off. You said guilt, shame, and secrecy. And I think that you're right. For a lot of women of color who, feel that we're supposed to shoulder these burdens and do it with a smile, absolutely. You know what I mean? Like not
Mhm.
just carry it, but you better carry that load heavily. I mean, happily rather. You know what I mean? With a whole smile, with a skip in your step, and get everything else done. And I think that you're right. I mean, that makes absolute sense that guilt, shame, and secrecy will be wrapped up in the way that women of color process things that they go through, and even, you know, determine whether they're going to talk about the things that they, that we go through, right? So,
Exactly. And it's definitely prevalent in your more traditional African cultures. There I have a lot of clients who are either from the Caribbean or Nigeria, and holding on to values of like you keep family business in the
mhm.
family, and staying with your husband even if he is not particularly kind to you or right for you. That mental illness is not something that is a thing. Like you're supposed to be able to just come into, this country, and, you're supposed to go to school, and work and, be successful. And all of your struggles and things like that, you have to, take it on the chin. And it's really unfortunate because, I've had teenagers who are like secretly having therapy, like they're
Mm,
16. So, they're at the age of consent, and, they can't talk to their parents about why they feel like they need therapy, or they can't talk to them about why they feel like they may need medication or things like that. And so they feel stuck. And even to the point where, they've been suicidal, and, just not seeing a way out of it because they don't want to disappoint their parents or go against what their parents are telling them.
wow. I mean, that really tugs at my heart, especially as an educator, because I think about the ways I've seen that, on the other side, actually seeing, students who will show up in that way. Because again of that guilt, shame, and secrecy. And I love that you brought that up, because I think, you know, as women of color, we can talk about all the ways that society places all these burdens on us, and maybe what, other women or even men may think of us. And we've really got to acknowledge the elephant in the room. And that is, I mean, Carrie, you talked about this a little bit earlier about the way we're socialized. In many ways, we perpetuate these same stereotypes and images and ideals in our households with our own children, right? And I think, and I don't think that that's any cause for blame, shame, or guilt or secrecy. But I do think that when we fail to acknowledge that, that's when we get in that danger zone of continuing to push these narratives that are ultimately harmful, right? And I know we all love our children, so we're not doing it intentionally. But you're right. And especially when it comes to women of color, when there are lots of ideas about what type of wives or spouses or partners we are. And so I think that in a lot of ways, a lot of us feel, this pressure to hold it together because that's what we're supposed to do. And
Mhm.
where the heck did we get that from? You know what I mean? But we do carry that. So I thank you for bringing that up, because listen, if you're tuned in, we always try to challenge our audience to think about something in a different way. And I do want to say examine ways that we in our own households either perpetuate or are complicit in these stereotypes around women of color and how we should show up in relationships, or b, what are some ways that you are working to dismantle or disrupt them. So I'd love for you to share in the comments if you're watching this. Thank you for sharing that. So I have another question, Carrie. I'd like for you to weigh in first, and then ladies, Edwina and Nafisa and Chantel, I'd love for you to also chime in. But what I want to know is, what advice do you give your clients so that they see ways to work on and grow themselves in relationships? And so I want you to, I love this kind of path that we're on in this conversation, because we can't help the way that we were socialized, but we can start to take some steps to maybe grow in a different direction or start to disrupt or dismantle these systems, within ourselves first and within our household. So what's some advice that maybe you've already given your clients to just kind of work on themselves, or that you would give anyone out there watching? Because people are tuned into this episode because I know we all need healing and they want to hear from you, therapists. So what advice would you
Well,
give?
the first thing is, what you mentioned that you do for yourself that is individual therapy. Like it doesn't matter whether your primary issue is within your relationship or not. I feel like we're all individual people and we come to a relationship as a whole person. And if we're not a whole person, then those are the things that leak into the problems within the relationship. So number one is definitely, don't be afraid or feel ashamed or feel like if I am in therapy, that means that I'm crazy. I have heard that so many times, like, I'm not crazy. And I'm like, nobody said you were crazy.
Yeah.
What does it mean to be crazy? And I think that starting there is challenging yourself and what ideals you have about being able to reach out for help. And then the next thing is to seek time for self-care within your everyday, making it a part of your daily rituals. So it's not just something that you do once or, every now and again, but something that can be rejuvenating on a daily basis. I go to therapy as well, and I have off and on for a while because I think it's important to understand the client's perspective, what it's like to sit in that seat. But also to get ideas and things about things I may have never thought about. And one of those things was coloring. Something as simple as an adult coloring book. I feel like, wow, why haven't I ever thought to do that on my own? It's changed my whole life. Like I was sitting there coloring, making little mandalas and all kinds of stuff. Hoarding my colored pencils from my kids and everything. And so I think that if you find something that can bring you some joy, bring you some sense of peace and calm, to make it a part of your daily. And for some people, it's running, yoga. I appreciate everybody being active. For other people, I'm a meditation kind of girl. I like to sit in the silence, put some music on. And really just isolate that time for yourself. And I think especially with my clients that are people of color, I see that, we're working 5 jobs and, taking care of the kids, and we're trying to be, superwoman and doing it all for ourselves, that we never give that same energy to ourselves. And I think that is probably the hardest habit to break, is to just take a pause for yourself.
You dropped so much. Ladies, I would love to hear what you all have to say. Are any of you currently in therapy or counseling, if you're willing to share, or maybe had a past experience? Like, what advice might you give, or what steps have you taken to work on yourselves? I would love to hear that.
I am currently in therapy, and it actually took quite a long time for me to get there for so many reasons. And I know we'll go further into, steps to take. But yeah, so I'm currently in therapy, and yes, I am. Now it's like a part of my life. It's like something I definitely know, like I need this. And we have like a reoccurring meeting that happens like every other week. They was like, even if it's just to do a check-in. And so I definitely encourage it. One of the things that she said that I thought was like so insightful when she's, as we referring to relationship, is, going to a relationship as a whole person. And so that definitely resonated with me. And it made me think of one of the things to do is that self-reflection piece, and even just asking yourself that question, Like, what makes me whole? And I think that that's something to really to sit with and think about, because you might be thinking you're going into a relationship whole, or maybe you have the idea that it's not a going into a relationship. It's like two halves coming together to form a whole. But I definitely do believe it's two wholes coming together, you know, within themselves and then growing from there. And so what makes me whole? That is a question to sit with. And it's a question that I think that if you're not able to answer, you probably aren't ready to be in a relationship with someone else, because I think the most important relationship is the relationship of self. And it is, you know, because it's like, this is really the only person that I can control. This is the person who truly needs to be loved the most, who that I can communicate with, I cannot get rid of. So this is, you know, the most important relationship ever. And for me, one of the things that I like to do is journaling. And I've been journaling as since I was a little girl, because I did not come from, we talk about those generational issues. And so communication was one of the lacks of my growing up process. And so I needed a space where I could talk and be vulnerable and just, you know, all of the emotions and everything that was going on. I turned to journaling for that. And so I've been doing this entire time. And I've actually gone back and looked in my journals from like different stages of my life to just see like the growth, to see areas of pain, those, and it's just that within itself to be able to reflect on where I've been, the journey I've been on, where I currently am. And I think that can also help to create that wholeness, because you can see like the holes in your life, and ways in which you can go about to get yourself to a place where you fully feel as a whole person, and then, you know, moving on into a relationship with someone else.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, you know what I love? You know, I've always been a journaler as well, a writer as well. But what I love that you shared, I think that, and I think that there's some, you know, some goodness in this practice when folks like write stuff down and they like tear it up and destroy it. Like I get that. But you know, you were one of the, maybe even the first person who, when you first shared with me months ago, you know, about your journaling, that you revisit that time. And I think that that's another great practice, not just for reflection, but I think a lot of times, and Adrian Holloman talked about this, what was it, last month, you know, thinking about not just how like you went through this storm, but how you like rose above it and got out of it. And so I think it's also a great practice to reflect on where you've been, to show yourself some gratitude and some compassion and some grace and appreciation, and say, like, yes, absolutely, I was there, but now I am here, and I got here because of XYZ, you know, because when we're journaling, we, you know, we're writing out the process. You know what I mean? Like it's more than a timeline. We're filling in those dotted, you know, those dashes. And so thank you so much for sharing that. Nafisa and Chantal, like, what do you all think in terms of seeking therapy?
Well, I currently am not in therapy. I have been in therapy before, and I'm actually looking to start therapy again. I think it's healthy for, I think everybody could utilize a benefit from therapy. And a lot of what Edwina said and what Carrie said definitely resonated with me. And I feel like that again, and I mentioned this, I believe, on our last episode, or one of the other two, like self-care is just so important. And I think we really need to just really lean into and just be unapologetically, radically, and passionately taking care of ourselves and doing whatever is necessary for that. Because I feel like if we are pouring in and doing what we need to for ourselves, whatever that looks like, if that means yoga, journaling, I journal as well, I meditate, you know, I exercise, whatever it looks like that you need to do for yourself. And some also asking for help too. And I think, as Carrie touched on, I feel like we feel like we can't ask for help, or it makes it look like we're weak, which you touched on, which we talked about with that double-edged sword of feeling like you have to be the strong Black woman, we have to hold everything down. And being able and knowing that it's okay to be vulnerable and say like, hey, like I need some help with this. Can you help me out with this? Looking to see what you can take off of your plate. so that you don't burn out, because that's what ends up happening. And then you're not good for any relationship, you know, whether it be as a mom, whether it be as a wife, a girlfriend, whatever, at work. Because eventually, if you just keep on go, that's what's going to happen. And then that affects other things. It not only relationships, it affects your mental health, your physical health. So we really just have to center taking care of ourselves, whatever that looks like. And I think boundaries is huge too. And setting those boundaries and letting and being vocal about those boundaries, and then holding everybody, other people in your life accountable for those boundaries as well. Because I feel like that's a big thing too, where often there's guilt and you may feel bad or feel like you need to show up a certain way all the time, and you've never created these boundaries. And people kind of just do feel like, oh, well, you never said nothing, it must be okay, right? You end up having resentment, you get build up, then you just want to explode. Or sometimes you think, well, wouldn't they know, or shouldn't they know? No, because you've never said it. You know, so we have to take accountability for our own happiness and health. And that boundary piece is huge. And we have to be, you know, really vocal about that, to let people know in our life, like what we need from them, what's not working for us. You know, when they cross that boundary, we got to say, oh, wow. You know, have to make them aware of that. And I feel like so much we do not do that. And I feel like that's a huge issue. That's something that, you know, I'm working on as well. So, yeah. And the journaling piece, I wanted to mention going back and rereading. I do that as well, because that really allows you to see your growth. And it's like, okay, there is some sunshine at the end of the storm. Like I came through this last storm, I can get through this too.
Yes. Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that, Nafisa. You know, I'm hearing lots of common threads in what everyone is saying so far in terms of, you know, taking care of ourselves. And what does that look like? Carving out the time, but also taking care of yourself, as Nafisa said, is setting boundaries. I mean, because if you just let folks just kind of tiptoe all over the place, or walk or stomp all over the place, or drag mud all over the place, right, then you end up the dirty one, right? And then you end up the one whose needs aren't being met. And so that's also a huge part of self-care. And in many ways, it supports self-care. It's like this like thread. It supports self-care, because when we don't have boundaries, we don't put ourselves first. We don't even put ourselves in the mix of folks who need to be taken care of, right? So I think that that's really, really important. And Chantal, I'd love to hear from you. I want to say when Carrie shared the importance of the individual therapy, the reason I just wanted to bring that back up is because, you know, again, we started out talking about what does that pre-work look like? What does it look like to be in it? And, you know, when Carrie was talking about self-care, just not needing to be in response to something, right? Because I do think a lot of times we go through something like, girl, I'm taking care of myself. And guess what, sis? Keep doing your thing. Keep doing that. I'm not suggesting that you stop. But what I am saying is, it's almost like for my folks who are, you know, my church going folks, religious folks who show up at church when they need somebody to pray for them on a sick and shut-in list. You know, I'm not calling anybody out, but what I'm saying is, and it's nothing, look, and I encourage you to do that. But what I'm saying is, when you're doing something for yourself, no matter what it is, if it's going to church and praying, if it's meditating, like just make that part of your wellness plan and not part of your recovery plan. It should be part of your ongoing wellness and your recovery, right? And that way, maybe you go through less recovery periods when it becomes part of your regular wellness plan. Who knows?
Amen.
But try it out. Who knows? But try it out. That's all I'm here to say. Chantal, what do you think?
No, I think everything you ladies said is so on point. I think what happens in our community, I think as Black and brown women, we get to the burnout first, right? So we burn out, or we crash, or we hit that wall, or we are in that storm. And then we realize, oh, we needed that self-care, we needed that therapy, we needed that support, we needed those boundaries. And so I'm so glad that we're having this conversation. And as you mentioned, Tony, you know, encouraging us, no, put yourself first now. do the upfront work so you don't have to do the behind the scenes work later. And so with my story, I went to therapy, started going to therapy back in 2018, and it's been one of the most exhilarating experiences of my life. And what I really learned through therapy was to really find my voice, right? And to really discover who I am, what I want, what matters to me, and using my voice to communicate that to others, to myself, and also in a relationship, right? And I think that therapy for us as Black and Brown women is our place to unload those burdens, right? Before we get into those relationships, that is the place where we can sort of do that, emotional healing and talk about our traumas and our dramas, right? And so I definitely have found that therapy has been extremely helpful in helping me on my path to wholeness, and wellness, and helping me to be very, very transparent about my anxiety, about PTSD, about showing up in my whole self and not being afraid to whether it's a relationship, a romantic relationship, or a friendship, and just really learning how to show up in my full self and saying, these are some of the things that I've been through. This is where I am emotionally. This is where I am mentally. And so I'm just so excited that we're having this conversation, because even in relationship, we have to be able to have that language, right? To share our vulnerable and things, and it's things that have happened to us, and being able to be open and transparent, because that's how our healing comes as well.
Oh my gosh. Listen, sis, you hit a whole, you made me think of something the entire time you were talking, but toward the end, when you talked about like that language, I think about, instances where, we as women of color will enter therapy or counseling, and we're going through this healing process, and we're developing this language, and then we still can't use it in the situations that we need to use it in. That's a whole different episode, right? But what I'm hoping is that if you're watching that, and if that's you, I know for me, that's never been a reason to stop going, because, I still want to be whole. But I think that can, cause a level of cognitive dissonance where it's like, there's so many ways that I can relate that to other things, but, where it's like I'm going and I'm doing this self work, I'm getting the language, but the only place I can use this is in here, and so hopefully, Carrie, your practice, what you start to see is movement. So whether that movement is positive movement in terms of, women of color feeling like, feeling empowered to actually, communicate their needs more effectively, again, whether it's in their homes and relationships, whether it's on their jobs, no matter where it is, out in the world, advocating for themselves, and or move in a different direction, and seek a new environment, or a new relationship, or get out of that one and just strengthen your relationship with yourself. So that's just kind of my one hope, because I've seen that. I've also been there, and I know what that can feel like when you're moving in one direction and yet, other areas aren't aligning, if that makes sense. And so,
yeah, definitely. I think that it's been great to see that people actually are able to translate that outside of the counseling room, and to be able to set those boundaries and be able to have healthier friendships and healthier relationships, and learn other ways to communicate with their spouse or their significant other outside of throwing things and acting a fool. Like, it's been good to see that, yes, that could happen, but there are instances where it doesn't quite work out that way, and that's okay too, because that just means that there's a longer journey or a longer road ahead of them, and everybody is different. And I think that one thing to keep in mind when it comes to therapy is that there is no quick fix. Like, this is a journey, this is a process. After the first session, you're not going to walk away magically changed. It's not, I'm not Jesus. I wish I could just touch your head and then bam, you fixed, but it doesn't work out that way. Maybe I'll get the healing touch one day, but right now it takes a lot of work. And I think that when you are beginning your journey, that you have to be willing to put in that work and to be consistent and remind yourself that this is for you.
Good stuff. I mean, I am just so grateful for this conversation. And this is just one of many. This will not be the last time. Even once we, move on out of the month of April, like we can't center and amplify the voices of women of color without talking about relationships because no matter how you identify, all of our identities are shaped by and impact the way that we show up in relationships. And so this is something that we will continue to talk about. So please let us know in the chat if you're watching in the Facebook group, in the comment section on YouTube. We do read each and every one. Let us know what you gained from this particular discussion, and is there anything you would add in terms of advice, for folks who are looking to seek counseling or therapy? How is it that we can grow ourselves while in these situations? And so, as we wrap up, I'd like for us to all, Carrie, I'd like to start with you, but in one sentence, what should a woman of color look for in a therapist? So, Carrie, like what should we look for?
I think the main thing that you should look for is someone that is open to your experience and that is compassionate and understanding that your experience is not like those of our Caucasian counterparts, that there is history and generational things that have been passed down since the dawn of time that aren't healthy, and that society and the environments that we live in have helped to shape our mental health and how we view mental health. And so finding a therapist that is sensitive to that is definitely paramount, because you have to be able to grow from there.
That's a whole word. I hope y'all heard that. That's a whole word. In other words, it sounds like that therapist has to be culturally competent. That's what okay. Edwina gave me that part finger. Chantal, in one sentence, what's something that you would say that just from your experience, even having gone through therapy, what's something that women of color should look for in a therapist?
I would say don't give up. If you don't find a therapist that you click with, find another one. A lot of times we can get discouraged if we don't find a therapist that we feel like understands us. Keep going on your journey and interview, because this person is going to be a very critical part of your life. So don't stop.
Thank you so much. Nafisa, what's something that women of color should look for in a therapist?
I was sitting here trying to think. Carrie to drop Carrie drop the mic and set over. So what I was kind of thinking about that wasn't already said was just someone you I feel like that you just relate to.
Mm-hmm.
Like you feel like you see like yourself in them and that you can identify with them. Because then I feel like you feel safe to be your authentic self. And that's what can help.
Thank you. Edwina, how about you?
For me, it took actually going and seeing the person and feeling the level of comfort. And so it's like I had to feel comfortable with this person because this is a person that I, want to open up to. So someone who I would say is inviting. And so into that space where I then feel comfortable enough and I can lay down my burdens of my strength and all the things that people think that I am, and into this person's space. So definitely a level of comfort is needed.
Edwina's here for the vibes, Sonny.
Always.
Yes, and you give me good vibes, sis. All of you do. I love each and every one of you. I would just round it up by saying, and I'm making a gross assumption here because I'm clearly not a therapist, so I've not been in any therapist training, but I do know what it's like to be an educator. And I know, sometimes when you're, obviously we have to care about kids, right? But, we're also encouraged to be like impartial, just kind of listen and all that. but I don't want all that. I mean, I do want someone who's in part who wouldn't tell me what I want to hear, and I want someone who's invested in me. Is where I'm going with that. So, like, even as an educator, when kids are sitting and I got two of them fighting, and I love them both, I'm still invested in them reaching a resolution. You know what I mean? So I would just say to look for someone who you can tell is invested in your growth, even if they're not sitting. I'm not talking about pacification, but you can feel when someone is like really cheering for you and really happy when you meet milestones. And I think that is important as well. I always hate when our conversations come to an end, but again, it has been lovely. Carrie, thank you so very much. It has been a great almost 45 minutes. Please, again, if you are joining us for the first time, go and bring some more friends next time and tell them that we have real, authentic conversations on BGSO. We center and amplify the voices of women of color, and everyone is invited to this conversation, right? And so, Carrie, can you tell everyone where people can find you? Do you have any social media, website, or any of that stuff?
So I do have a social media page on Facebook, Healing Waters Counseling. The best place to find me and any other therapist is on psychologytoday.com. So you can go to that website and plug in your area. You can plug in what kind of therapist you want, down to the gender, the race, the insurance company, all of that stuff. You can filter all the way out. And so it is one of the best sites to find a therapist. And they also have articles and things that you can read in the meantime and in between your sessions that give information that's credible on their website. So psychologytoday.com is definitely a good resource.
Thanks for dropping that. Thank you. All right. Well, it's been amazing. Do not forget that BGSO airs live. The podcast airs live on the 4th Thursday of each month. So next week, oh my gosh, April 22nd, next week, please join us live on YouTube. Or if you identify as a woman of color and you are not already part of the BGSO fam, then look for us on Facebook. Again, there is a page and a group. So I'm inviting you to the group. I mean, like the page too and share it, but I'm inviting you to the group. That is the ultimate affinity space. As always, it has been an absolute pleasure. Let us know what you think. Like, share, subscribe, and we will see you next week live. Same time, same place. All right, everyone. Have a good night.